Since November 2020, the attention of the world has been focused on the civil war that broke out between Ethiopia's northern Tigray region and the Ethiopian government forces. The ongoing 2 years of war have been caused by political tensions between the Ethiopian federal government and the Tigray regional authorities, the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), but the tensions between the two parties did not just start in 2020. Let's start at the beginning. Just after the Ethiopian Civil War in 1991, Ethiopia became a dominant party state ruled by the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front (EPRDF). The EPRDF was a coalition of 4 ethnically based parties dominated and monopolized by the Tigray People's Liberation Front. But just before the country became a dominant party state, it was an absolute monarch. However, this was until the 1974 Socialist Revolution deposed the Emperor Haile Selassie. Ethiopia then became a multi-ethnic federation when a Tigray People's Liberation Front led the alliance of rebels that overthrew the Marxist military regime. The Tigrayans at the time did not have so much power in their numbers, as they made up just 6% of the populations, but they came to dominate national politics. Meles Zenawi was the founding and most influential member of the TPLF. He was the Prime Minister of Ethiopia until he died in 2012. Haile Mariam Desalegn, his deputy prime minister, took over office from him. Desalegn was the chairman of the Southern Ethiopian People's Democratic Movement (SEPDM), which was a member of the coalition. However, less than 6 years after Desalegn took over office as prime minister, he announced his resignation after failing to suppress the 3 years of violent protest over the marginalization of other bigger communities. In the wake of his resignation, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, the then ruling party, named Abiy Ahmed, who was an Oromo, as the prime minister. And on 2nd April 2018, the Ethiopian parliament in a closed-door election elected Abiy Ahmed to rule. The TPLF officials, who had been the dominant party since 1991, decided to relocate to Tigray region after losing the election and were deposed from the federal government. They continued ruling in their region for 3 years, but during that time, they had frequent clashes with the federal government. For instance, the Tigray regional government defied the federal government when they refused to allow Ethiopian Federal Police to arrest Getachew Assefa, who was the former chief of the National Intelligence and Security Service of Ethiopia and an executive member of TPLF. When Abiy resumed office in 2018, he made a lot of revolutionary changes. He scrapped bans on opposition and rebel groups, removed corrupt officials from office, and ended 2 decades of hostility with the neighboring country, Eritrea. Abiy's mission was to squash civil unrest in the country, and so in 2019, in an effort to foster peace, the Prime Minister merged the ethnic and region-based parties of the EPRDF, including several opposition parties, into his new Prosperity Party. The TPLF, which used to be a part of the Ethiopian governing coalition, refused to merge into Abiy's Prosperity Party. This created and intensified the tension between the Tigray regional government and the federal government. In March 2020, the general elections were scheduled to hold in August 2020, but the National Election Board of Ethiopia delayed the elections to the following year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The TPLF regional government rejected the Electoral Board's instructions, claiming that they were unconstitutional, and so the TPLF defied the National Election Board and held its own regional election in September 2020. As expected, Abiy's government took the Tigray's election as defiance and considered it illegal. They decided to punish the TPLF region by slashing federal funding. The decision angered the TPLF, that they describe it as tantamount to declaration of war. Interestingly, the brewing relationship between Abiy and the Eritrean president Isaias Afwerki also added to the tension that the TPLF had against the federal government. According to the Eritrean Minister of Defense, Mesfin Hagos, Abiy and Isaias had a security pact to strike out of existence the TPLF, and so Ethiopian elite units were stationed at the Gergera base near Asmara. There were reports that the Ethiopian Reconciliation Commission tried to mediate between the two feuding parties, but the preconditions set by all sides were hindering progress. In October 2020, Abiy appointed a brigadier general to take up a military post in Tigray, but he was prevented from doing so by the Tigray government. This made the tension grow, and soon after, the federal government declares the TPLF a terrorist organization. The all-out civil war between the Tigray government and the Ethiopian government began the following month in November. The Tigray Special Forces, along with some allied local militia, attacked the Ethiopian National Defense Force (ENDF) Northern Command headquarters in Mekelle just before midnight. They also attacked the 5th Battalion barracks in Dansha and other Northern Command bases. Many people were killed in the attack, but the TPLF claimed the attack was carried out in preemptive self-defense. They seized military equipment and took thousands of soldiers prisoner because they had information that Abiy was preparing to send troops into the region after they defied orders and carried on with their elections. The Ethiopian government launched an offensive attack in retaliation the next day on November 4th, and after the attack, the federal government declared a state of emergency. In the days that followed, Eritrean soldiers and other forces from the neighboring Ethiopian region mobilized to reinforce the Ethiopian troops. On November 9th and 10th, there were 2 rounds of ethnic killings in the town of Maikadra. Over 600 civilians who were mostly Amharas and Wolkaites were killed with knives and machetes, but the accounts of who carried out the attacks differ. At first, the Amharas claimed they were attacked by the Tigrayan militia. Then the Tigrayan civilians claimed they were attacked by the Amhara militia. However, tens of thousands of Tigrayans had to flee from western Tigray into Sudan. Angry at the Eritrean involvement, and because they accused the Eritrean government of sending soldiers into Tigray, the TPLF fired rockets at 2 Amhara airports on November 13th. The next day, the TPLF attempted to bomb the capital of Eritrea, Asmara, with rockets, but the missiles missed. The joint armies of the ENDF Amhara region and the Eritrean forces launched the offensive as they used armed drones to bomb the Tigrayan artillery and weapons depots. By November 17th, the Ethiopian government accused the TPLF of bombing the 4 main bridges leading to Mekelle. However, the Tigray government denies the accusations, and so, for 2 days, the Ethiopian forces captured the Raya district and the towns of Shire, Alamata, Adwa, and Aksum. The fight in the Raya district claimed over 760 casualties from both forces. Meanwhile, the fight between Tigray and Ethiopia spread to Zalambesa, and the fighting between Tigray and Eritrea happened in Adikwala, Zalambesa, Taruna, Wadkomdi, and Bademe. On November 23rd, the Ethiopian forces made a move to take back Mekelle. They surrounded the city and announced the civilians should flee because they had no intention of showing mercy. Many residents of the city had already left due to the airstrikes that were being delivered in and around the city. Even the TPLF leaders, the special forces, and militia forces had already left. Still, the Ethiopian government began its assault by shelling the city, and by the end of the day, the Ethiopian government had regained full control of the city. It was reported that about 27 civilians were killed, with over 100 injured. The Tigray government was not deterred by the federal government taking over Mekelle. They vowed to continue fighting. Even after the federal forces had taken Mekelle and other major cities, the Tigray government began to regroup into mountainous areas. They reorganized their forces and called themselves the Tigray Defense Forces, TDF. The TDF then started a guerrilla campaign against Ethiopian allied forces. By December, the civil war had spread to other cities including Hagere Selam, Samre, Dogwa, Maitsemre, and around Mechu. In January of 2021, the TDF had regrouped, which allowed them to intensify their insurgency against Ethiopian forces, and this was after they had suffered setbacks and heavy losses. By April, the TDF had taken control of the rural areas of central and southern Tigray, along with parts of eastern and southeastern Tigray, while the ENDF was in control of the main roads and urban areas. The TDF was growing in strength, and they began to harbor the idea of separating from Ethiopia to become an independent nation. As the war raged on, more and more people died. It was reported that the TPLF had executed 300 refugees in the Hitsats camp. There was also an undated video that surfaced where Ethiopian troops executed 11 unarmed men before disposing of their bodies near Mahibere Dego. There were also reports that 229 civilians were killed in November. In October, the Ethiopian allied forces launched a coordinated ground attack on all fronts against the TDF. They used arms, tanks, helicopter, heavy artillery, warplanes, and drones. The Ethiopian forces took a new strategy by causing famine in Tigray. The federal government had put up blockades to prevent aid from reaching them. Several civil rights groups have accused the Ethiopian forces of obstructing efforts to dispense aid, but the federal government has denied all allegations. In June, the United Nations estimated that the war, along with the drought in eastern Ethiopia, had left more than 29 million people in dire need of aid. And although the numbers are not certain, the UN, along with several civil rights groups, fear that tens of thousands of people have died as a result of the fighting, while others have died as a result of hunger and lack of medical aid. In August, the TDF and the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, joined forces and became an alliance with the singular goal of overthrowing Abiy's government. The two groups revealed that they were in talks with other rebel groups to establish a grand coalition. By November 2021, as the TDF's coalition struck deeper into the federal-controlled territory, the Ethiopian government declared a 6-month state of emergency. There were curfews, movements were restricted, and critics of the government could be arrested and detained without a court warrant. Towards the end of 2021, the Ethiopian government announced that they had reclaimed the towns and strategic cities that were captured by the TDF and their allies. And on December 20th, the TDF requested a ceasefire. The ENDF then stated that it would no longer advance into the Tigray region. In January of 2022, things looked like they were going to die down. The Ethiopian Council of Ministers proposed to end the state of emergency, and by March, the Ethiopian government declared an indefinite humanitarian truce so that the Tigray region could receive humanitarian aid. But after a few months of ceasefire, in August 2022, the fighting resumed again. This time, both parties are blaming each other for starting the fight. There have been accusations that Tigray has been smuggling in weapons and that Ethiopia's Air Force has also taken delivery of weapons meant for the TDF. The federal government has also accused the OLA, which is in alliance with TDF, of killing hundreds of civilians. In response, they deployed the army to avert further bloodshed. The TDF has also gone on to capture the town of Kobo after the ENDF withdrew. The situation in Ethiopia is very tense, and now both Ethiopia and Tigray are suffering from food shortages, and the Ethiopian civil war has spilled into Sudan and Somalia. With several proposals for peace negotiations and mediation, people can only hope that this civil war will come to an end soon. But so far, the civil war in Ethiopia has claimed tens of thousands of civilian lives, including 23 aid workers and 3 UN guards. It has displaced over 2 million people, left over 60,000 people as refugees, over 9 million people in need of food and medical care, with over 20,000 people missing. And with that, we have come to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss an upload. Thank you very much for watching. Catch you guys in the next video.